Hey everyone, how are you today? Welcome to Get Ready With Me and Talk About Stuff. My name is Stephanie. Welcome to the show. This show is just me doing my makeup and talking to you about whatever is on my mind. And I do have a really fun topic for you today. Now, I did tell you in my last video that my next video was going to be about the Beast of Bray Road, but I started researching and I concluded that there is just a lot that I need to learn about this thing before I make a video about him. So the good news is, while spooky season is short, cryptids are forever. So whenever I do it, probably by the end of the year, but whenever I do it, it will be just as fresh and timely as it would be during spooky season. So that is the good news. Actually, I don't even have any bad news. It's just all good things. But I do want to take a minute to acknowledge. So, I haven't been on for a minute, and it's because my son has been sick. And as you may know, if you are a parent during this very weird time we're living in, if you're a parent especially with school-age children, you know that if your children have any symptoms at all, then the school does not want them there. So, my son has been home for a minute, and this is my first kid-free day in several weeks. The school was closed for a week because there were so many kids that were sick and yada yada yada. Yakety schmackety, here we are. Anyway, it is so nice. It is so nice to just be here. So thank you for being here. So what we're going to talk about today is something that some would consider an urban legend. Others would consider a matter of fact. But it is something that I think we are all familiar with. Now, growing up in the 1980s, I remember very clearly warnings would start playing on the local TV stations about tainted Halloween candy. And sometimes we would see commercials about local hospitals or police stations that were offering. I have to be very careful. I've been getting a lot of nosebleeds lately, so I don't know what that's going to mean for today's makeup, but I'm just going to warn you, there may be blood. I hope not. I already had one today and I don't need another. Anyway, I digress. So I remember seeing commercials for like local hospitals that would say, come in and we'll x-ray your candy to make sure there's nothing hiding in your chocolate bar. Or police departments that would say, bring your candy down to the station and we'll examine it for you, make sure it's all good. I suspect that in both cases, probably just they wanted to get access to their favorite candy because they couldn't go out that night. I don't know, it's just a theory. And regardless, I remember seeing these commercials. I remember that my brother and I, my sister too, but she was really little, so, you know, whatever. But my brother and I would go to the neighborhoods and, you know, we'd come home with a pretty good haul. And the first thing we would do is dump the candy on the ground, and under the watchful eye of our parents, we would carefully inspect each piece before we ate it. And we had to inspect every piece, whether we intended to eat it at that moment or not. And then, of course, the parent tax was paid, you know, giving mom and dad some of their favorites because they took us out trick-or-treating, and then letting the other siblings know, no, you will not ever get your hands on this piece of candy. It is my favorite. Don't even ask me again. I don't want to discuss this any further. So that was what every Halloween was like. And this went on, as you know, as far back as I can remember, until we moved to northern Michigan. Now, I don't remember seeing it quite as much up here. I don't think I ever saw a commercial offering for, you know, the hospital offering to x-ray the candy. I don't remember the local police department saying, hey, bring your candy down, we'll inspect it for you. What I do remember, though, this is kind of funny. So when we lived downstate, which is what us northern Michigan people call, like, anything lower than, like, I don't know, like an hour away or whatever. When we lived downstate, we would trick-or-treat till dark, sometimes past dark. And, you know, it was not unusual at all for kids to go home dump their haul and then go back out, because we lived in, you know, pretty well populated neighborhoods, and you know, you could trick or treat all night and come home with an amazing selection of candy, right? So we moved up here, and I remember my sister and I went out. So I would have been at the time like 11, and she would have been 7. So we were, you know, arguably we were pretty young, but this was just what kids did when I lived in Warren. I mean, this was like a normal thing. So we went out, we came home for a little bit, dumped our candy, and then we were like, I wonder if we could get more candy if we went out again. So we headed out, and the local cop, we only have like 2 cops in our village, and there are the county police too, but like village cops, we have, I think, 2 or 3 now. At the time, we pretty much had 1. And so we went out. It was heading toward 9 o'clock, and we were walking downtown, and we're like, it's eerily quiet. We're like, this is so weird, because we're accustomed to people being out a good part of the night trying to get all the candy they can. And the cop sees us, and he's like walking downtown, kind of patrolling down there, and he's like, what are you kids doing? And we're like, we're going trick-or-treating. And he's like, trick-or-treating was over a long time ago. You get home right now. And I'm like, okay, well, we weren't doing anything wrong. We were just kind of walking around, being only 11 and 7 years old, walking around after dark. I don't see why that's a problem. But anyway, it was kind of a funny introduction to life in northern Michigan, which was vastly different from what we had experienced living in Warren. And so I've been here for a long time now, and there are still things about this place that I'm not accustomed to, because I spent my formative years in a much different place. And I think there are some parts of living here I will never, ever get used to. But anyway, so that was what it was like being a child in the 80s. I don't know if this was a thing that was happening, like, if it was common anyway, prior to certain events that happened in the 80s. But I remember back in the 80s, and maybe a little into the 90s, but not that I recall, having to carefully inspect every piece of candy, because there was always concern that it could be hiding razor blades, it could be poisoned, you know. There was just always that concern that there was this sinister neighbor giving out poison candy. So how did candy tampering fears take root? We're going to discuss in a minute if these even have any merit. That's a whole separate issue. But let's talk about how these things even took hold of the American psyche. So worries about candy tampering actually date back to the Industrial Revolution, because it became more and more common for foods, including candy, to be made outside of the home and in an industrial situation. So people started speculating, well, we don't know what's in this, you know, we didn't make it ourselves, we don't know if this is even safe to eat. And, you know, to be fair, and I've done it again, too much foundation. Why do I only do this when I'm on camera? That's the only time this happens. Any other time I'm pretty good at you know, assessing how much foundation I actually need, but when I get on camera and start talking to everybody, all logic and reason goes out the window. Anyway, so to be fair, there have been times throughout the history of, you know, the industrialization of food preparation when certain dyes, certain chemicals, sweeteners and so forth have been found to be harmful. And, you know, it didn't matter that they had full FDA approval. Upon further study and upon enough people being harmed, it was learned that these things were harmful and they were discontinued. So there was, you know, there was grounds for concern. Like, even though in the beginning of the industrialization era, you know, they didn't have widespread reports of these things happening, there was definitely concern that not knowing what's going into your food might be a problem. And people were worried. So they started, you know, when candies, of course, became very, you know, you could get candy in, you know, very cheaply. It was something, obviously, the children would have enjoyed, probably adults too, I would imagine. I mean, sugar, the advent of sugar being widely available to even the middle and lower classes, that's a whole video in itself. That was just something. But, you know, with that becoming widely available, that made candies widely available, and there were concerns. So this fear that we have isn't a new thing. It goes way, way back. Now, like I said, some ingredients have proven to be harmful, but does that mean that there is a basis for the widespread panic over Halloween candy? Well, criminal justice experts Joel Best and Gerald Haruki, I think is his last name, they did a study on what they termed Halloween sadism, which is harmful acts perpetrated specifically on or around Halloween. You know, they have to be related to Halloween to be considered Halloween sadism. And what they found was that nearly all claims of Halloween candy poisoning or other forms of tampering were either misidentifications, meaning somebody saw a substance on a candy or something and they assumed it was something toxic, and then further inspection showed no, it's not. Or it was wildly overstated. You know, there might have been one or two incidents and it was made to sound as if this was a huge problem, which it was not. So they also noted that fears about tainted Halloween candy tend to rise during stressful and fearful times. For example, in 1982, there were the Tylenol Murders. Have you heard about this? I remember hearing something about this back then, but, you know, having been just a kid at the time and not really paying much attention to that stuff, and certainly not taking Tylenol, you know, I didn't think too much of it. Now, I knew my mother took Tylenol, but I trusted her enough that, you know, if she thought there was anything janky about it, she wasn't going to take it. So I didn't really pay too much attention to it, but it kind of lingered there in the back of my head. And so when I was reading about, you know, concerns about Halloween candy and where they come from, the Tylenol Murders, I was like, oh, right, okay, now I remember this. So what happened was in 1982, there was a spate of poisonings that occurred when cyanide-laced acetaminophen, and I don't know that it was all Tylenol, but Tylenol is acetaminophen, and that was what was discovered. They were put on store shelves, and the poisonings led, you know, I don't know how many there were. I just know that there were people who were poisoned by tainted Tylenol or other forms of acetaminophen, and they died. These murders led to the use of child-proof packaging, you know, those lovely bottles that can be so hard to open sometimes. That's why they're common now. And it led to to legislation that created very tough laws at the federal level for people who would tamper with drugs. And that caused a large uptick in the concern over the Tylenol or over Halloween candy. Now, it's also worth noting the Tylenol murders to this day remain unsolved. So that is also an element. So this terrible thing happened. People died. We don't know who did it. Who's to say it can't happen again? So the concerns are primarily unfounded, but there have been isolated incidents of Halloween candy tampering. So let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? Perhaps you've read about some of these things, perhaps not. I only knew of one of them. I did not know there were so many. There aren't very many, but there are a whole lot more than I thought there were. So in 1959, California dentist William Shine gave chocolate-covered laxatives to trick-or-treaters. He was charged with outrage to public decency and the unlawful dispensing of drugs. Now, I did not read what his motive was for doing this. I mean, maybe he was just a jerk You know, maybe he was just like, I don't want any trick-or-treaters coming to my house, so anybody who does, guess what they're going to get? I mean, I don't know if just turning your porch light off back then was an option. I don't know. I don't know. And the reason I say that is because our next case involves a woman who decided that older trick-or-treaters deserved to suffer. So in 1964, New York woman Helen Feel? I don't know. She was upset over the idea that older kids were out there trick-or-treating, and she felt that they were too old to be doing that. So if she had older trick-or-treaters come to her door, she would give them things like ant poison, mouse traps, things of that nature, you know, things that were clearly marked dangerous or toxic. She would put it in their trick-or-treat bag. It would be like if somebody were to decide, you know what, if older kids come to my house to trick-or-treat, I'm giving them Tide Pods, you know, because some people are dumb enough to believe that older kids want those anyway. Whole other story. She was charged, she said it was meant as a joke, but she was prosecuted and pled guilty to charges of endangering children. Let's carry on, shall we? Probably the most infamous Halloween poisoning happened in 1974 when Texas man Ronald O'Brien gave cyanide-laced pixie sticks to 5 children, including his own 8-year-old son, Timothy. Now, the other children did not eat their pixie sticks because, let's be honest, unless they're given in quantity, pixie sticks are like the consolation prize of Halloween candy. Or is that just me? I always thought, man, these things, they're just not worth the effort it takes to get them open and so forth. But his son Timothy, he wanted that pixie stick and he ate it and he died. And no one saw him poison the candy, but it was learned through investigation that he had recently purchased life insurance policies on all of his children, and it was believed that the reason he gave the candy to his children's friends was because he wanted to obviously cover his tracks. If he had only given it to his children, it would have been much more suspicious. But, you know, if he poisons the neighborhood kids too, it makes it easier to get away with. Or so goes his thinking. Never anticipated that his own son would be the only one to eat the candy. You gotta think these things through, people. So, he was convicted of first-degree murder, and he died by lethal injection in 1984. Now, his attorney was quoted in 2009 as saying, "As you know, my client was convicted of killing Halloween." Now, the thing is, for it to be considered the Halloween sadism we discussed earlier, it has to be something that not only happens on Halloween, but has to be something that, you know, is, I guess because of Halloween. You know, that has to be like, there has to be like some, you know, more than, you can't be doing it on Halloween just because it's convenient and you're trying to kill your kids. That's what I'm getting at here. So, it's not really considered a typical case of, you know, candy tampering because he only gave the candy to his children's friends to try to cover his tracks. His target was his own children. Halloween just gave him a convenient way to do it with greater possibility of no one suspecting that it was their own father poisoning them with cyanide-laced pixie sticks. I mean, at least pick a better candy. That's all, you know, whatever. I shouldn't be making light of that. That's not cool. But, you know, getting pixie sticks in my trick-or-treat bag just always irritated me. I'm like, it takes longer to open the pixie stick and get it to where you can, you know, dump the powder into your mouth or whatever than it does to actually dump the powder and enjoy it. I mean, it just is so much effort for so little reward. So even though the murder was decades ago, concerns about tampered with Halloween candy still persist. In 1997, a 7-year-old California girl collapsed while trick-or-treating. people believed that it was because of tainted candy. And the Santa Monica police actually started confiscating kids' Halloween candy. I'm curious as to how they did that. Did they just, like, go up and down the streets and be like, give me your candy? I mean, how does that work? You know, I don't live anywhere near Santa Monica. I don't remember this story when it happened. And I'm just curious as to how a police department would go about confiscating people's candy. I mean, did they go house to house? What did they do? But anyway, so they confiscated people's candy. And I would imagine inspected it. To my knowledge, there were no tainted candy was found, and as it turned out, this child did not die from tainted Halloween candy. She died from a strep infection. Or no, I'm sorry, that was a heart murmur. So in 2001, in Vancouver, British Columbia, a 4-year-old girl died after eating Halloween candy. So again, people assumed it must be the candy because 4-year-old girls don't just die after eating candy for no good reason. And so they, you know, A plus B equals C, so they assumed it was the candy. As it would turn out, this child is the one who died of a strep infection, not poisoned candy. So even though there has been no real evidence presented to justify the widespread concern over tainted Halloween candy, it certainly persists in the minds of people that it could be a possibility. This was not helped when in 2000, now this is just funny. In 2019, the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission issued a warning about people giving away their edibles instead of candy. Now, if you've ever shopped for edibles, you know, those are not cheap. And I can promise you, nobody is putting their edibles in your kid's Halloween bag. Nobody is just giving that stuff away. It is expensive. And unless you've got a whole lot of money to just like throw away in some kid's trick-or-treat bag, nobody's going to be giving that stuff away. I'm going to pause for a minute because I'm not feeling that great after my earlier nosebleed and it's hard for me to concentrate. So I'm going to pause for a second and finish this up, and I will be right back. Alright, I am back. I was going to draw a little nose and whiskers and stuff on my face, but I thought with all the nosebleeds and things I've been having lately, it would probably be better to just leave my nose the heck alone. But I did put some color in my hair, got some cute little ears. I look adorable. I actually think this was made for kids, but that's okay. Anyway, so over the years, despite any real evidence to validate to the concern, you know, traditional trick-or-treating has been somewhat displaced by things like trunk or treat. I don't know if you've ever attended one of those events. I did when my son was younger, and it is convenient. You know, you get people bring their cars. They literally fill their trunks with candy. Sometimes people decorate their cars and stuff. It becomes a whole event. Sometimes there's like hot dogs, you know, apple cider, donuts, that kind of thing. And it does make people feel a lot safer about, especially with little kids, taking their kids out to trick-or-treat. And it, you know, it's more fun. I think it's more fun for parents, especially when you have small children, to be able to hang out with other parents, and you know, we all kind of watch each other's kids, and it's a fun event, and it's more convenient for parents, I think. But it's been my observation that over the last several years, there has been less emphasis on like residential trick-or-treating and more emphasis on like businesses, like for example in downtown districts, you know, going from business to get candy instead of going to, you know, neighborhood to neighborhood, house to house, that kind of thing. I don't know what it's like where you are, but that's just what I've seen here. Now, it is worth noting the U.S. is not alone in its concern over tainted candy. In the 1980s in Japan, there was a crime ring called the Monster with 21 Faces. And this crime ring contacted a couple different candy companies. And they threatened the candy companies with poisoning their candy if the companies did not agree to pay like a heavy ransom to keep them from doing that. So there was immediately a large concern. Lots and lots of candy and cookies and so forth were pulled off of store shelves and examined, and it was found that none of them had been poisoned. Okay, I don't know, I did not read whether or not the companies actually paid the money, or if they were just like, no, screw you, we're not doing that, and they just pulled candy and stuff. I don't know. But months later, so the crime rings surfaced again, and they demanded another payment. And this time, they followed through on their threat. There was tainted candy and cookies discovered in, it was cyanide laced actually, discovered in central Japan. No one was poisoned because they were able to pull it off the shelves before anyone made a purchase of these particular products. But the chief of police felt responsible for not stopping the crime ring when they first started making their threats. And unfortunately, this officer would end up dying by suicide because he just felt so much guilt. To this day, despite multiple investigations, this case has never, ever been solved. So, as I said, it's not that there are not legitimate incidents that involve tainted candy, not just in the US, but in other parts of the world. But how much of that is actually related directly to Halloween, and how much of that is just people being jerks? So, is the concern warranted? What do you think? And what were your traditions growing up? Like on Halloween night, if you were somebody who went trick-or-treating, did you bring home your candy and dump it out and inspect it under the watchful eyes of your parents or whomever was responsible for you? Or did you just dive in and say, whatever happens, happens, you know, throwing caution to the wind and eating my miniature Snickers bars? Or did you like take it to be inspected at a hospital or a police department? I mean, how did your family handle that? I'm curious. And how did you, if you had siblings or other people you trick-or-treated with, how did you handle the bartering for your favorite candies when all the trick-or-treating was done? Because my siblings and I, we would be willing to trade a few things, but there were some things we just absolutely would not part with, and it didn't matter how badly you wanted it. The answer was emphatically no. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry, dropped something there. I hope you enjoyed this. I wanted to do more with my face, but I'm just kind of trying to be sensitive to stuff my nose is deciding to do at this time in my life. And it's still fun though. I still love the pink hair and the ears and everything. I did leave some links in my description for more information on these stories that I shared with you today. I also left links there if you want to offer any kind of support. Especially, I don't know if you know this or not, but I do paintings. I do mostly acrylic pours, but I've also started doing like unicorns and things like that. And I do have an Etsy shop. The link is in the description. I hope you'll take a look there. And if you find something you like, I hope you will make it yours. In any case, I appreciate you so much. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Thank you so much for watching and for, I really appreciate the comments, you know, the supportive ones, the other ones, whatever. But I appreciate those who express support and who let me know when you enjoy the topics that I cover. It is extremely encouraging, and it just makes me want to keep doing this. I don't care if, you know, only a handful of people are watching. It's fun to do. So I will keep doing it as long as you want to keep watching. Anyway, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, don't shut on yourselves or anyone else. Be safe out there. We are still in the middle of these very weird times. So use caution when you're going out, please. And just remember, we're all in this together, and the only way out is through. I will see you again very soon, and who knows what the topic will be. I just don't know where my mind might decide to go. Anyway, have a good rest of your day, and I will see you again very soon. Bye. Meow.